Ethan Carter never thought a Tuesday morning coffee run would end with his hands around a stranger's wrist and a room full of people staring at him like he'd just sprouted wings. The man, expensive suit, loud voice, the kind of arrogance money buys in bulk, had been yelling at the barista for 2 minutes straight over foam temperature when Ethan made the mistake of asking him to lower his voice. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was a threat, then a shove, then the man's hand reaching inside his jacket. Ethan moved without thinking. One breath, two calculated movements. The man was on his knees, gasping, his hand pinned, the weapon he'd been reaching for clattering uselessly across the tile. No one got hurt, but everyone saw. And someone filmed it. If you want to know how a single father with no interest in the spotlight became the most talked about person in a town that doesn't talk about much, stick around. Like this video, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels, and let me see if you can keep up. Ethan Carter didn't want to be noticed. He'd built his entire life around that principle. At 32, he had the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. Clean-shaven, brown hair kept short enough to avoid maintenance, eyes the color of old pennies that didn't invite questions. He wore plain t-shirts in gray or navy, jeans that had seen better years but still held together, and work boots with scuff marks he'd stopped trying to polish out. He drove a 12-year-old Honda Accord that ran fine, if you didn't think too hard about the check engine light that had been on since 2023, and lived in a rental house on Maple Street where the grass grew too fast and the neighbors kept to themselves. He liked it that way. Quiet. Predictable. Safe. His daughter, Mara, was 7 years old and the only person in the world who mattered. She had his dark hair, unruly in the mornings, and his late mother's smile, wide and unguarded in a way that made his chest tighten every time he saw it. She loved dinosaurs with an intensity that bordered on obsession, hated peas with equal passion, and asked approximately 900 questions a day, most of which started with, "But why?" or "What if?" Ethan answered all of them, even the ones about whether T-Rexes could do cartwheels or why clouds didn't fall down. He had to. She was all he had, and he was all she had, and that math was simple enough that it didn't require explanation. Mara's mother had left when Mara was 14 months old, just packed a bag one afternoon while Ethan was at work and disappeared. No note, no forwarding address, no custody battle because she didn't want custody. For the first year, Ethan kept expecting her to come back, to change her mind, to at least call. She never did. Eventually, he stopped waiting. He sold the apartment they'd shared, moved to this nowhere town 3 hours south where rent was cheap and no one knew him, and rebuilt everything from scratch. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. Tuesday mornings meant the cafe on Birch Street. It wasn't fancy, just a counter with a scratched laminate surface, 6 tables with mismatched chairs, and a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed since the place opened in 2019. The coffee was decent. The muffins were better. Mara liked the blueberry ones, the kind with the sugar crystals baked on top that got all over her face and hands no matter how carefully she ate. Ethan liked that the place opened at 6:30 and stayed mostly empty until the lunch crowd hit around noon. He could get her fed, drop her at school by 7:50, and be clocking in at the warehouse by 8:30 without anyone bothering him or asking questions he didn't want to answer. That particular Tuesday started the same as every other. Mara had insisted on wearing her green sneakers even though one of the laces was fraying badly enough that Ethan knew he'd need to replace them soon. He tied it twice, double knotting it the way she liked, grabbed his wallet and keys from the bowl by the door, and held the cafe door open while she bounced inside, already talking about a book her teacher had read the day before. It was about a turtle who wanted to fly, Mara said, tugging on his sleeve as they approached the counter. Her backpack, covered in dinosaur patches she'd sewn on herself with his help, bounced against her shoulders. He tried really, really hard, but he couldn't do it. So he made friends with a bird instead, and the bird carried him up into the sky. Do you think turtles would actually like flying, or would they get scared? Maybe, Ethan said, nodding to the barista as they reached the counter. Or maybe they'd get airsick. She wrinkled her nose the way she always did when she thought he was joking, but wasn't completely sure. Turtles don't throw up. You sure about that? Pretty sure. I read a whole book about them. That book mention anything about flying? No, that's why I'm asking you. The barista, a college-age kid named Sophie with a nose ring and perpetually tired eyes, smiled at them. She worked the morning shift most weekdays and had their order memorized by now. Morning. Usual? Yeah. Thanks, Sophie. No problem. Give me just a minute. Mara climbed onto one of the stools at the counter and swung her legs, humming something off-key that might have been the theme song from the dinosaur show she watched on Saturday mornings. Ethan leaned against the counter and pulled out his phone, thumbing through the messages. One from his supervisor, Rick, asking if he could stay late Thursday to help with a delayed shipment. Another from the landlord reminding him rent was due Friday, as if Ethan needed reminding when he'd been paying on time for 3 years straight. He typed out quick replies. Yeah, I can do Thursday, and I know. I'll drop it off, and pocketed the phone just as the door chimed behind him. That's when the man walked in. Ethan noticed him the way you notice a car alarm going off at 3 in the morning. Impossible to ignore, immediately irritating, the kind of presence that demanded attention even when you desperately didn't want to give it. Mid-50s, maybe older, but trying hard not to look it. Tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Ethan made in 2 months. Silver cufflinks that caught the morning light. Hair gray at the temples in that distinguished way rich men wore like a badge. Phone pressed to his ear, voice loud enough that the whole cafe could hear every word. No, I don't care what the contract says, the man said, not bothering to hold the door for the woman behind him. She caught it herself, shot him an annoyed look, and sat down at a table near the window. Tell them if they don't have it done by Friday, they can find another buyer. I'm not playing games with amateurs who can't meet deadlines. He strode to the counter like he owned the building, like everyone else was just taking up space in his world, and kept talking without acknowledging Sophie or the fact that she was currently making someone else's drink. No, listen to me. I don't pay you to give me excuses. I pay you to fix problems. So fix it. Sophie glanced up, her hand steady on the espresso machine. I'll be with you in just a espresso, double shot, and don't burn it this time. She blinked, startled. I'm sorry? I said don't burn it. Last time I was here, whoever made it left it on too long, tasted like dirt. Sophie's cheeks flushed. I didn't make your drink last time, sir. That might have been... I don't care who made it. I'm telling you not to burn it now. You understand English, don't you? Ethan felt Mara's hand slip into his. She didn't say anything, but her grip was tight, her fingers small and warm against his palm. He squeezed back, silent reassurance. Just ignore him. Let it go. Not our problem. The man finally hung up his phone and tapped his fingers impatiently on the counter, the sound sharp and rhythmic in the quiet cafe. Sophie set down Ethan's coffee, black, no sugar, and Mara's muffin on a small plate, then turned to start the espresso. The machine hissed, steam rose, 30 seconds passed. The man sighed loudly, the kind of performative sigh designed to communicate displeasure to everyone in earshot. This is taking forever. Sophie didn't look up. It's brewing, sir. It'll be ready in just a second. I can see that. I'm saying it's too slow. How hard is it to make one drink? Ethan picked up his coffee, the ceramic mug warm against his palm. Come on, kiddo. Let's grab that table by the window. Mara slid off the stool, muffin in hand, and followed him. They'd made it 3 steps when the man's voice rose again, sharper this time. Are you kidding me? This is lukewarm. Sophie flinched like she'd been slapped. I just made it, sir. It should be... It's not hot enough. Make another one. Sir, I promise it's the right temperature. The machine is set to... I don't care about the machine. I care that I'm paying $4 for something I could make better at home. Do your job. Ethan stopped walking. Mara tugged his hand, her voice small. Dad, let's just sit down. Just a second, sweetheart. He turned back toward the counter. The man was leaning over it now, face inches from Sophie's, finger jabbing the air between them like a weapon. Sophie's hands were shaking. Her eyes were shiny, the way they get right before tears come. She looked about 20 years old, probably putting herself through school, probably didn't get paid enough to deal with this. Ethan set his coffee down on the nearest table and walked back to the counter. Hey, the man didn't look at him. What? You mind lowering your voice? There's kids in here. That got his attention. The man straightened, turned, and looked Ethan up and down with the kind of slow, deliberate assessment people use when they're deciding if you're worth their time. His eyes lingered on the scuffed boots, the plain t-shirt, the jeans with the small tear near the left knee that Ethan kept meaning to patch. The man's expression settled somewhere between contempt and amusement. Excuse me? You heard me. Who the hell are you? Someone asking you to calm down. The man's jaw tightened. You've got some nerve. Maybe, but you're making a scene over coffee. Doesn't seem worth it. I'm a paying customer. I have a right to expect decent service. And she's doing her job. You're just being an asshole about it. The word landed hard. The cafe went quiet. The woman by the window looked up from her laptop. An older couple near the door stopped mid-conversation. Sophie stood frozen behind the counter, eyes wide. The man's face darkened. He stepped away from the counter and into Ethan's space, close enough that Ethan could smell expensive cologne and the stale remnants of a cigar. You think you can talk to me like that? I just did. Do you know who I am? No, don't really care either. The man's eyes narrowed. You should. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink, just held the guy's stare and waited. Most people backed down at this point. Most people weren't actually interested in escalating over nothing. They wanted the performance, the feeling of dominance, but not the consequences. This guy wasn't most people. You want to play tough guy? The man said, voice dropping to something quieter and meaner. Fine. Let's see how tough you really are. He shoved Ethan, not hard, just enough to make a point, to establish that he could put his hands on someone without consequence. Ethan took a half step back, absorbing it, keeping his balance without effort. Behind him, Mara gasped. Sophie made a sound that might have been his name. The older couple stood up. Ethan's pulse stayed even. His breathing didn't change. Walk away, Ethan said quietly. Or what? The man reached inside his jacket. Ethan moved. He didn't think about it, didn't plan it, didn't hesitate. One moment the man's hand was disappearing into his jacket, and the next Ethan's fingers were locked around his wrist, thumb pressed against the pressure point just below the base of the palm, twisting the arm out and down in a smooth, controlled arc that brought the man to his knees before he even understood what was happening. The motion was surgical. No wasted movement, no excess force. Just enough pressure to control without causing real damage. Ethan's other hand came down on the man's shoulder, pinning him in place, and the device, a sleek black stun gun, compact and expensive-looking, clattered out of the man's grip and slid across the tile floor toward the door. Silence dropped over the cafe like a heavy blanket. The man gasped, face pressed against the edge of the counter, arm locked at an angle that didn't allow for negotiation or leverage. Ethan held him there, steady pressure, his voice completely flat. I said walk away. Let go of me. Not until you calm down. The man struggled, trying to pull free. Ethan adjusted his grip slightly, just enough to reinforce control without escalating pain, and the man went still. Somewhere behind them, a phone camera clicked. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, are you getting this?" Mara's voice, small and frightened. "Daddy?" Ethan glanced at her. She was standing by the table where he'd left his coffee, muffin forgotten on the plate, eyes wide and glassy. The sight of her scared face cut through the adrenaline like a knife. He softened his grip slightly, just enough to keep control without causing real pain, and looked back at the man beneath him. You're going to stand up slowly, Ethan said. You're going to walk out that door. And you're not going to come back here. Do you understand? The man didn't answer, just made a choked sound that might have been agreement or might have been rage. Hard to tell. Ethan released him and stepped back, putting himself between the man and Mara, hands loose at his sides but ready. The man staggered to his feet, face red, jacket rumpled and askew. He looked at Ethan like he was seeing him for the first time, like the person in front of him didn't match the assumptions he'd made 30 seconds ago. You have no idea what you just did. Probably not. I will destroy you. Ethan didn't respond, just watched as the man straightened his jacket with shaking hands, shot one last venomous look around the room, and stormed toward the door. He shoved it open hard enough that it banged against the outside wall, and then he was gone. The stun gun stayed on the floor. No one moved to pick it up. Ethan turned to Mara. You okay, sweetheart? She nodded, but her lip was trembling. He crossed to her in 2 strides and crouched down so they were eye level, his hands on her shoulders. I'm sorry you had to see that. Is he coming back? No. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. She threw her arms around his neck. He held her, feeling the rapid thud of her heart against his chest, and closed his eyes for a second. Over her shoulder, he saw Sophie staring at him, mouth slightly open. The woman by the window had her phone out, screen pointed toward him. The older couple was whispering urgently to each other. Ethan stood, lifting Mara with him, and nodded to Sophie. Sorry about that. She just shook her head, speechless, and waved off the apology with one hand. He carried Mara outside, the morning air cool against his face, and set her down by the car. She climbed into her booster seat without a word. He buckled her in, checked twice that the straps were secure, and got behind the wheel. His hands were steady on the steering wheel. His breathing was normal, but his mind was already running through the consequences, cataloging possibilities, weighing outcomes. Someone had filmed it. That meant it would spread. That meant questions. That meant attention. Exactly what he'd spent the last 6 years carefully avoiding. By the time Ethan dropped Mara off at school 20 minutes later, 3 people had already mentioned the cafe. The first was another parent in the drop-off line, a woman named Karen, whose son was in Mara's class. She pulled up beside him, rolled down her window, and gave him a nervous smile. Hey, someone posted a video of you this morning at the cafe. Pretty intense. Ethan kept his expression neutral. Yeah, it was nothing. Didn't look like nothing. You okay? We're fine, thanks. She nodded slowly, clearly wanting to say more but not quite daring to. Well, if you need anything. We're good. The second person was Mr. Alvarez, the crossing guard, who just gave him a firm nod and said, Good for you, man. That guy had it coming. Ethan didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded back and kept walking. The third was Ms. Brennan, Mara's teacher. She caught him before Mara ran inside, pulling him aside near the entrance. She was in her early 40s, kind-faced, with graying hair pulled into a practical bun. Is everything all right, Mr. Carter? Yeah, just a thing at the cafe this morning. Her expression shifted into something careful, almost pitying. I saw the video. It's already all over the parent Facebook group. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Of course it was. Mara's fine. I'm fine. It's over. Miss Brennan hesitated, clearly weighing whether to push. If you need anything, if Mara needs anything, please let me know. We're good. Really. Thank you. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Okay, but my door's always open. He walked back to the car, ignoring the looks from other parents clustered near their vehicles, phones out, heads together in tight knots of conversation. He could feel their eyes on him, could practically hear the whispers. That's him. That's the guy from the video. By the time he got to work at the warehouse, the video had hit the local news subreddit. By lunch, it was on Twitter with 3 different hashtags. By mid-afternoon, someone had uploaded it to TikTok with the caption, Single Dad Doesn't Play, and it had 40,000 views. By the time his shift ended at 5, the view count had passed 200,000. Ethan didn't watch it. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what it showed. His supervisor, Rick, a wiry guy in his 50s who usually didn't care what anyone did, as long as freight got moved on time, caught him by the loading dock at the end of his shift. That you in the video everyone's talking about? Ethan didn't look up from the clipboard he was signing, marking off the last pallet delivery. Yeah. Hell of a move. Where'd you learn that? Doesn't matter. Rick laughed, the sound rough and genuine. Half the guys in here have seen it. Torres wants to know if you teach classes. I don't. Shame. Could probably make decent money. Rick clapped him on the shoulder. You're kind of famous now, man. Great. Could be worse. Could have lost. Ethan handed him the clipboard and headed for his car without responding. His phone buzzed the entire drive home. Texts from people he hadn't talked to in years, friend requests from strangers on Facebook, missed calls from 2 local reporters whose numbers he didn't recognize. He ignored all of it. When he pulled into the driveway of the rental house, he sat in the car for a full minute, forehead resting against the steering wheel, and tried to figure out how to explain this to Mara without scaring her more than she already was. The front door opened. Mara appeared on the porch in her pajamas even though it was only 5:30, holding her stuffed triceratops named Rexy. She waved. He waved back. And for just a second, the rest of it didn't matter. Inside, he made her favorite dinner, boxed mac and cheese with extra butter the way she liked it, apple slices arranged on a plate, carrot sticks she wouldn't eat, but he put there anyway because he was trying. They sat at the small kitchen table, and she told him about her day in the breathless, circular way 7-year-olds do, jumping from recess to a spelling test to something funny her friend Olivia said about frogs. He listened, nodded, asked follow-up questions, pretended his phone wasn't vibrating in his pocket every 30 seconds with notifications he had no intention of checking. After dinner, they curled up on the couch and watched half an episode of a nature documentary about deep-sea creatures. Mara fell asleep 20 minutes in, her head heavy against his side, one hand still clutching Rexy. He carried her to bed, tucked the blankets around her, kissed her forehead, and stood in the doorway for a minute just watching her breathe, her face peaceful in sleep. Then he went back to the kitchen and finally looked at his phone. 237 notifications, a dozen voicemails, messages from people he'd never heard of calling him a hero, a vigilante, a threat, a fraud. Someone had dug up his full name and posted it in the comments section of the TikTok video. Someone else had found his address and shared it on Twitter. A third person had started a GoFundMe for his legal defense without asking his permission, and it had already raised $800. Ethan opened the app, looked at the campaign for 10 seconds, reported it, and then deleted every social media app from his phone. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink, and stared out the window at the small backyard. The grass needed mowing. The fence was leaning slightly to the left. Normal problems. Manageable problems. Problems that didn't involve lawyers or strangers or the weight of a past he'd buried for good reason. A knock at the door pulled him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the clock on the microwave. 8:45. He wasn't expecting anyone, didn't get visitors, didn't have friends who just dropped by. He walked to the front door and checked the peephole. A woman stood on the porch. Late 20s, dark hair pulled into a low ponytail, wearing a charcoal blazer over a white shirt and dark jeans. She didn't look like a reporter. No camera, no notebook. Didn't look like a neighbor. Too polished, too deliberate. She looked composed, controlled, like someone who walked into rooms and immediately owned them. Ethan opened the door halfway, keeping his body in the gap. "Help you?" She smiled. It was a professional smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ethan Carter?" "Depends on who's asking." "My name's Lena Brooks. I was at the cafe this morning." He frowned, searching his memory. He didn't remember seeing her, but then again he'd been focused on the man, on Mara, on getting out before things escalated further. "Okay. I wanted to talk to you about what happened. I'm not doing interviews. I'm not a reporter." "Then what are you?" She tilted her head slightly, considering him with eyes that were sharp and assessing. "Someone who thought you handled that situation better than most people would have." "Thanks. Have a good night." He started to close the door. She put her hand against it, not forcefully, just enough to stop the motion. "I also wanted to warn you." Ethan went still. "About? The man you embarrassed this morning? His name is Vincent Hale. He owns half the commercial real estate in this county and has a reputation for being vindictive. You put him on the ground in front of a dozen witnesses, and now half the state has seen it online. He's not going to let that go." "Not my problem." "It will be." "Why do you care?" Lena's smile faded. She pulled her hand back, clasped both behind her, and met his eyes with something that felt uncomfortably close to sincerity. "Because I know what it's like when someone powerful decides to come after you. And I know you're not ready for it." Ethan studied her. The expensive blazer. The calm confidence. The way she spoke like she'd rehearsed this conversation twice before knocking. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I wanted to give you a heads up, that's all." "Why?" "Because you didn't have to step in this morning. Most people wouldn't have. You did. That means something." Ethan didn't respond, just stood there, one hand on the door, weighing whether to believe her or shut this whole thing down and go back to pretending the world outside his house didn't exist. Lena reached into her blazer and pulled out a business card. Clean white cardstock, simple black text. She held it out between two fingers. "If Hale comes at you, and he will, call me. I might be able to help." He didn't take the card. "I don't need help." Everyone needs help eventually. Not from strangers. Fair enough. She set the card on the porch railing right next to a potted plant Mara had insisted on keeping, even though it was half dead. "But if you change your mind, the offer stands." She turned and walked down the driveway to a sleek black sedan parked at the curb, moving with the kind of easy confidence that came from never doubting you belonged wherever you happened to be. Ethan watched her go, then picked up the card and turned it over in his fingers. Simple design: name, phone number, email address. No title, no company, nothing to indicate who she was or what she did. He slipped it into his pocket and went back inside, locking the door behind him and sliding the deadbolt home. Sleep didn't come easy that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him, the old pipes creaking, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. He replayed the cafe in his head. The man's sneer. Mara's frightened face. The split-second decision that had dragged him back into a world he'd left behind on purpose. He'd trained for years to move like that, trained to be faster, sharper, more controlled than anyone else in the room. He'd been good at it, better than good. And when it had all fallen apart, when the things he'd done in the name of following orders stopped making sense, when the missions blurred together into something ugly he couldn't justify anymore, he'd walked away, changed his name, buried the past, built something smaller, quieter, something that couldn't hurt anyone. But muscle memory didn't forget. Training didn't fade. And now, because he couldn't just stand by while some entitled bastard threatened people weaker than him, everyone knew. Ethan rolled onto his side and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd figure out damage control. Tomorrow he'd deal with Vincent Hale or Lena Brooks or whoever else crawled out of the woodwork. Tomorrow. Tonight, he just needed to make sure Mara stayed safe. Because if this spiraled, if the attention kept growing, if people started digging into who he used to be, safe was the one thing they might not be anymore. Yet, Wednesday morning started badly and got worse. Ethan woke to 17 missed calls, all from the same unknown number. He ignored them, made Mara breakfast, and drove her to school in silence. She didn't mention the cafe, didn't ask about the video, just sat in the back seat humming and kicking her feet against the seat, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. He parked, walked her to the entrance, and watched her disappear into the building. Halfway back to the car, his phone rang. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Same number. He answered. Yeah? Mr. Carter? A woman's voice, professional, clipped, the kind of tone that said she was used to people doing what she told them. This is Amanda Forster with Hale Properties. Mr. Hale would like to speak with you regarding yesterday's incident. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. I don't have anything to say to him. Mr. Hale believes a conversation would be mutually beneficial. I doubt that. He's prepared to offer compensation for any distress caused during the altercation. I'm not interested. Mr. Carter, tell him to leave me alone. He hung up. 10 seconds later, a text came through from the same number. Mr. Hale is a reasonable man. Refusing to meet will only complicate matters. Please reconsider. Ethan deleted it and got in the car. He made it halfway to the warehouse before the next call came. Different number, same message. He ignored it. By noon, he'd received 7 calls and 14 texts, each one more insistent than the last. By the time his shift ended at 5, a lawyer named Gerald Moss had left a voicemail explaining in calm, measured tones that Mr. Hale was considering legal action for assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and that cooperation now would be far more preferable than costly involvement later. Ethan sat in the warehouse parking lot and listened to the whole message twice. Then he pulled out Lena Brooks's card from his wallet, where he'd tucked it that morning, and stared at it. She'd said Hale would come at him. She'd been right. He typed her number into his phone, hesitated with his thumb over the call button, and put the phone away. He didn't need help, didn't want it. He'd handle this the way he handled everything, quietly, carefully, without making things worse than they already were. But when he got home and found a certified letter taped to his front door, he knew quiet wasn't going to cut it. The envelope was thick, official-looking, stamped with the return address of Morrison and Associates, a law firm based in the city 40 miles north. Ethan tore it open, standing on the porch, read the first page, and felt his stomach drop. Vincent Hale was suing him. Assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, false imprisonment. The amount listed at the bottom, $250,000, made his vision blur for a second. He didn't have that kind of money, didn't have a tenth of it. His entire savings account held maybe $3,000, and half of that was earmarked for Mara's school expenses and emergency car repairs. He went inside, locked the door, and sat down at the kitchen table with the lawsuit spread out in front of him. The legal language was dense, deliberately intimidating, designed to make him feel small and powerless. It was working. He pulled out his phone and called Lena Brooks. She answered on the second ring. Ethan? Not a question. She'd been expecting him. How did you know he'd do this? Because men like Vincent Hale don't lose gracefully. Ever. And you made him lose in public, in front of people who work for him and people he needs to impress. That's unforgivable in his world. What do I do? A pause. Then, softer. Let me help. I don't even know who you are. I'm someone who's dealt with men like Hale before, multiple times. I know how they think, how they operate, what pressure points work, and I know how to beat them. Ethan leaned back in the chair, eyes closed. Why? Why what? Why help me? You don't know me. We've never met. What's in this for you? Lena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its professional polish. Because you did the right thing, and people like you shouldn't be punished for that. It's as simple and as complicated as that. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. Okay. Okay? Yeah. Help me. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up. Ethan set the phone down and looked at the lawsuit again, at the numbers and accusations and threats printed in neat Arial font. He folded it carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and went to check on Mara. She was in her room, building an elaborate structure out of wooden blocks, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Is everything okay, Dad? Yes, sweetheart, everything's fine. She smiled and went back to her blocks, carefully balancing another piece on top. Ethan stayed in the doorway a minute longer, memorizing the scene. Her messy hair, her mismatched socks, the fierce concentration on her face. Then he went back to the kitchen to wait for Lena Brooks. When she arrived exactly 20 minutes later, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. She read the lawsuit standing at his kitchen counter, asked a dozen rapid-fire questions about the Café incident, what exactly was said, who was standing where, whether anyone else intervened, and made 3 phone calls while pacing his small living room. By the time she finished, Ethan felt like he'd been debriefed by a military strategist. This is a pressure tactic, Lena said, setting the papers back on the counter. Her blazer was gone, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She looked more real this way, less polished. He's not actually expecting to win in court. He's expecting you to panic and settle. I don't have money to settle with. He knows that. He's counting on you being too scared to fight, so you'll either disappear or beg him to make it go away for whatever you can scrape together. Ethan met her eyes. I'm not scared. Lena smiled, actually smiled this time, and it changed her whole face. Good. Then we fight. We? I told you, I know how to beat him. And what do you get out of this, really? She sat down on the couch, folding her hands in her lap, and looked at him with something approaching honesty. I used to work for people like Hale, corporate strategy, crisis management, reputation control. I helped them win battles they shouldn't have won, helped them bury problems that should have destroyed them. I was very good at it, made a lot of money, and I hated every second of it once I figured out what I was actually doing. So you quit? Eventually. After one too many times watching good people get crushed because they couldn't afford to fight back. She paused. When I see someone like you, someone who stood up when it mattered, who didn't calculate the cost first, I want to help. That's it. No ulterior motive, no hidden agenda. Just let me do something that actually matters for once. Ethan studied her for a long moment, weighing, deciding. Okay. Okay? Yeah, let's fight. Lena stood, extending her hand. Ethan shook it. Her grip was firm, steady, the grip of someone who meant what she said. This is going to get worse before it gets better, she warned. I figured. Hale's going to come at you harder, meaner. He'll try to dig up everything about your past, make you look dangerous, unstable. He'll want you to crack. Then we don't let him. Lena's smile widened just a fraction. Then let's get to work. They spent the next 2 hours going through everything. His employment history, his rental agreement, his custody arrangement with Mara's absent mother, or rather, the complete lack thereof, every detail that might become ammunition. Lena took notes in a leather-bound notebook, asked clarifying questions, and never once looked at him like he was a problem that needed solving. Just a person who needed backup. By the time she left, it was past Mara's bedtime. Ethan locked the door behind Lena, checked all the windows, and went to tuck Mara in for the second time. She was already asleep, Rexy clutched against her chest, her breathing deep and even. He stood in the doorway and made a promise to the sleeping child who trusted him to keep her safe. Whatever came next, whatever Vincent Hale threw at him, he wouldn't break. He couldn't afford to. The week that followed felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. Ethan went to work, picked up Mara from school, made dinner, helped with homework, read bedtime stories, all the normal rhythms of their life. But underneath it all, the pressure kept building. Legal documents arrived every other day. Phone calls came at random hours. Twice, reporters showed up at the warehouse asking for interviews. Rick had to kick them out. Lena became a constant presence, though not an intrusive one. She'd show up in the evenings after Mara went to bed, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and they'd sit at the kitchen table going through depositions, witness statements, timeline reconstructions. She worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd done this 100 times before, red pen moving across pages, notes accumulating in margins. "Hale's lawyer is good," she said one night, pushing a stack of papers toward Ethan. "Gerald Moss. He specializes in intimidation disguised as legal strategy. Look at this language: reckless endangerment, history of violent behavior. They're building a narrative." Ethan scanned the document. "I don't have a history of violent behavior. They're going to try to create one. They'll subpoena your employment records, talk to your neighbors, interview people from your past." She paused, tapping her pen against the table. "Is there anything in your background they could use? Military service? Police record? Anything?" He hesitated just long enough that she noticed. "Ethan, it's complicated." "Complicated how?" He set the paper down and rubbed his face with both hands. This was the conversation he'd been avoiding, the one that meant letting someone see parts of himself he'd buried for good reason. "I wasn't in the military, not officially." Lena went very still. "What does that mean?" "It means I worked for people who didn't exist on paper, did things that weren't supposed to leave records. And when I walked away, I made sure none of it followed me." "Private security?" "Something like that." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Can they find it?" "I don't know. Probably not. But if Hale has enough money and enough motivation, he has both." Lena closed her laptop. "Okay, we operate under the assumption they might find something, which means we need to control the narrative before they do." "How?" "By making you look like exactly what you are, a single father who defended himself and a barista from a man with a weapon. We lean into the video. It's your best asset." "The video makes me look dangerous." "No, it makes you look capable. There's a difference." She pulled up the footage on her phone, the same clip that had been viewed over 1,000,000 times by now. "Watch it again. Really watch it." Ethan didn't want to, but he did. The angle was from someone at the corner table, partially obscured by the counter, but clear enough. You could see the shove, the man reaching into his jacket, Ethan's hands moving almost too fast to follow, the stun gun clattering across the floor. And then, this was the part that had gone the most viral, Ethan turning immediately to check on Mara, his whole body language shifting from controlled aggression to protective concern in under a second. "You see it?" Lena asked. "See what?" "You weren't trying to hurt him. You were trying to stop him, and the first thing you did afterward was make sure your daughter was okay. That's what people remember. That's what we use." She made it sound simple. Ethan knew it wouldn't be. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Lena spent the interim building their defense, while Ethan tried to keep Mara's life as normal as possible. It wasn't easy. Other parents at school drop-off stared. Some whispered. A few, the ones who'd watched the video and decided Ethan was some kind of hero, wanted to shake his hand or buy him coffee. He declined politely and kept moving. Mara noticed, of course. Kids always noticed. "Why is everyone acting weird?" she asked one morning, buckled into her booster seat, backpack on her lap. "What do you mean?" "Like yesterday, Emma's mom asked me if our family was okay, and Mr. Alvarez keeps giving you thumbs up. It's weird." Ethan merged onto the main road, buying himself time to formulate an answer. "Some people saw a video of what happened at the cafe. They're just reacting to it. The thing with the angry man? Yeah. Are we in trouble?" No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. Then why does everyone care? That was the question, wasn't it? Why did everyone care? Why couldn't people just mind their own business and let him disappear back into obscurity where he belonged? Sometimes things get attention even when we don't want them to, he said finally. It'll calm down soon. She seemed to accept this, turning her attention to the book in her lap, a thick paperback about paleontology she'd checked out from the library, but Ethan saw the worry in the set of her shoulders, the way she chewed her bottom lip. She was scared, trying not to show it, but scared. He reached back and squeezed her knee. Hey, look at me. She did. We're going to be okay, I promise. She nodded, but her eyes were too serious for a 7-year-old. Okay, Daddy. That night, after Mara fell asleep, Ethan stood in the shower longer than necessary, letting the hot water beat against his shoulders until the small tank ran cold. He dressed, checked on Mara one more time, and found Lena sitting at his kitchen table when he came back downstairs. He'd given her a spare key 2 days ago when she'd pointed out she was coming by every evening anyway, and it would be easier if she didn't have to wait on the porch. You need to start locking your back door, she said, without looking up from her laptop. I do lock it. Not well enough. I got in through the kitchen window. You broke into my house? I lifted an unlocked window. Different thing. She finally looked up and her expression was tense. We have a problem. Ethan sat down across from her. What kind of problem? Hale's team found something, or they think they did. She turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a heavily redacted document, most of the text blacked out, but a few lines visible. His name, or rather a name he used to go by, appeared twice. His blood went cold. Where did they get that? I don't know yet, but they're going to use it. Moss filed a motion this morning to introduce evidence of your history of violence and specialized combat training. The judge hasn't ruled on it yet, but if she allows it, it's over. Not necessarily. Lena closed the laptop. But we need to get ahead of it, which means you need to tell me everything, not the sanitized version. Everything. Ethan stood up, walked to the sink, poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink. Behind him, Lena waited. Patient. Unmoving. I was 19. He said finally, still facing the sink. Didn't have money for college, didn't have prospects. A recruiter found me working construction and said he could offer me something better, training, purpose. Good pay. I said yes. What kind of recruiter? The kind who doesn't leave business cards. He turned around, leaning back against the counter. They trained us for 2 years. Combat, tactics, languages, infiltration. We worked overseas mostly, situations where official military couldn't operate, deniable operations. Black ops. That's a cleaner term than what it actually was. How long? 6 years. Then I met Mara's mother during a brief stateside rotation, got her pregnant. Realized I couldn't keep doing what I was doing and be a father, so I walked away. They just let you walk? No, but I made it clear I was done and that trying to stop me would cost them more than it was worth. He met her eyes. I disappeared, changed my name legally, built a new life, and I haven't touched that world in over 7 years. Lena was quiet for a long time, processing. Does Mara know any of this? No, and I want to keep it that way. If this gets introduced in court, she'll find out eventually. Everyone will. Then we make sure it doesn't get introduced. Ethan, I'm serious. That part of my life is dead. I killed it on purpose. I'm not letting Vincent Hale drag it back just because his ego got bruised. Lena stood up, walked around the table, and stood directly in front of him. She was shorter than him by a few inches, but something about her presence made her seem taller. Then we need to file a counter motion. Argue that your past employment, however they're characterizing it, is irrelevant to what happened at the cafe, that it's prejudicial and inflammatory. Will it work? Maybe. Judge Carolyn Reeves is presiding. She's fair but strict. If we can make a solid argument that Hale's team is trying to poison the jury pool before trial even starts, she might block it. And if she doesn't, then we prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Ethan laughed, the sound harsh. That's not much of a strategy. It's the only one we have right now. She was right. He hated that she was right, but she was. Okay, file the motion. Lena grabbed her laptop bag. I'll have it ready by morning. Get some sleep. You look like hell. Thanks. She paused at the door. Ethan, what you did, walking away, building this life for Mara, that takes more courage than anything you probably did in those 6 years. Don't forget that. She left before he could respond. Ethan locked the door behind her, checked all the windows, and went upstairs. He stood in Mara's doorway, watching her sleep for a long time, Rexy tucked under her chin, her hair spread across the pillow in dark tangles. He'd killed people in his old life. Not many, not indiscriminately, but enough that the number mattered. He'd done it because he believed it was necessary, because someone with more authority than him had said it was justified, because he was 19 and 20 and 23 and didn't know how to question orders that came wrapped in flags and national security. He'd walked away when he finally understood that necessary and justified were just words people used to sleep at night. If that past came out now, if Mara had to learn that her father used to be someone completely different, someone capable of things she couldn't imagine, it would break something between them. And he couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't. The counter motion was filed the next morning. Judge Reeves scheduled a hearing for the following week. In the meantime, the media attention intensified. Local news ran a segment titled Café Hero or Vigilante, with talking heads debating whether Ethan's response was proportional. Someone started a Facebook group called Team Ethan Carter that gained 3,000 members in 2 days. A separate group called Hold Violent Men Accountable gained 1,500. Ethan ignored all of it. He went to work, picked up Mara, made dinner, helped with homework, read stories. The routine held him together, but the cracks were starting to show. Rick pulled him aside during lunch break on Thursday. "You doing okay, man?" "Fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you haven't slept in a week." "I'm handling it." Rick studied him. "That woman who's been helping you, Lena, she any good?" "Yeah, she's good." "Then trust her, and stop carrying all this by yourself." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "You've got people in your corner. Use them." Ethan wanted to argue, to insist he was fine, but the words wouldn't come. So he just nodded. That evening, Lena showed up earlier than usual, carrying takeout bags. "You haven't eaten today, have you?" "I ate. Coffee doesn't count." She set the bags on the counter. "Chinese. Sit." They ate in relative silence, Mara chattering between bites about a science project involving volcanoes. Lena asked questions, genuinely interested, and Mara lit up under the attention. Watching them, something in Ethan's chest loosened slightly. After Mara went to bed, Lena and Ethan returned to their usual positions at the kitchen table, documents spread between them. "I heard back from Judge Reeves' clerk," Lena said. "The hearing is set for Tuesday at 10 a.m. We'll have 20 minutes to argue our motion, then Moss gets 20 minutes to respond." "What are our chances?" "Honestly, 50-50. Reeves is unpredictable. She might see this as Hale's team trying to smear you, or she might decide your background is relevant to assessing threat level. So we could lose before we even start, or we could win and cut off their best attack vector." She leaned back in her chair. "Either way, we're going to need character witnesses. People who can testify that you're not a threat, that you're a good father, that what happened at the cafe was an anomaly, not a pattern." "I don't have a lot of people." "You have some. Your supervisor, Mara's teacher, neighbors who've known you for years." She paused. "What about Mara's mother? Any chance she'd testify?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "No." "You sure? Because if we could get her to say, 'I said no, she left,' she doesn't get to come back now just to make me look stable." Lena held up her hands. "Okay, we'll work with what we have." They spent the next hour drafting a list of potential witnesses and what each person could speak to. By the time Lena left, it was past midnight, and Ethan's eyes were burning with exhaustion. He dragged himself upstairs, checked on Mara one more time, and collapsed into bed. Sleep came fast and heavy, dragging him under before he could think too hard about Tuesday's hearing. He dreamed about the cafe, but in the dream, everything went wrong. The man pulled the stun gun faster. Ethan wasn't fast enough. Mara screamed, and when he woke up gasping at 3 a.m., he couldn't shake the image of her scared face. He didn't go back to sleep. Friday and Saturday blurred together. Ethan took Mara to the park, to the library, to a movie she'd been wanting to see. Normal things. Safe things. She seemed happier, less tense, and that helped. Sunday, Lena showed up mid-morning with a stack of folders. "We need to prep for Tuesday. Mock arguments, anticipated questions, everything." They worked through lunch, through dinner, until Ethan's head was spinning with legal jargon and hypothetical scenarios. Lena was relentless, playing devil's advocate, poking holes in their arguments, forcing him to think 3 moves ahead. Moss is going to paint you as dangerous, she said. He's going to suggest that someone with your training should have found a nonviolent solution. How do you respond? I did find a nonviolent solution. No one got hurt. He had a stun gun that I disarmed in under 2 seconds without causing injury. But you put him on the ground, restrained him, used force. Minimal force, controlled force, the kind designed to stop a threat without escalating. Lena smiled. Good. That's what you say. Stick to facts. Stay calm. Don't let Moss bait you into sounding defensive or aggressive. You think he'll try? I know he will. His entire strategy depends on making you look unstable, so you stay steady, polite, unshakable. She met his eyes. Can you do that? Yeah, I can do that. Good, because if you crack on the stand, we're done. Monday arrived too fast. Ethan called in sick to work, first time in 3 years, and spent the day running through his testimony with Lena until he could recite it in his sleep. Mara picked up on his tension despite his best efforts. Are you nervous about something? She asked during dinner. Just a thing I have to do tomorrow. What kind of thing? Boring grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. She frowned. You always say that. Because it's always true. She pushed peas around her plate, clearly not convinced. Is it about the angry man from the cafe? Ethan set down his fork. Yeah, it is. Are you in trouble? No, but some people think I might be, so I have to go explain what happened. To who? A judge. Her eyes widened. Like on TV? Sort of, but less dramatic. Can I come? No, sweetheart. You've got school. But what if they ask about me? I was there. They won't ask about you, and even if they did, I'd handle it. He reached across the table and took her hand. I need you to trust me on this, okay? Everything's going to be fine. She squeezed his fingers. Okay, Daddy. But her eyes said she didn't quite believe him. That night, Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through testimony, anticipating questions, trying to prepare for something that felt increasingly unpredictable. Around 2 a.m., his phone buzzed. Text from Lena. Can't sleep either, he texted back. No. Meet me at the diner on 5th. I'll buy you terrible coffee. 20 minutes later, they sat in a booth at an all-night diner that smelled like grease and burnt toast. Lena looked as tired as he felt, hair pulled into a messy bun, no makeup, wearing sweatpants and an oversized jacket. You look human, Ethan said. Don't get used to it. She wrapped her hands around a chipped mug of coffee. You ready for tomorrow? As ready as I'll ever be. That's not an answer. He sighed. I don't know. Maybe. What if Reeves allows the evidence? What if Moss gets to parade my past in front of everyone? Then we deal with it. But spiraling about what ifs at 2 a.m. won't help. You're spiraling too. That's why you're here. She smiled faintly. Fair point. They sat in silence for a while, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the night shift cook clanging pans in the kitchen. Why are you really doing this? Ethan asked eventually. Lena took a long sip of coffee. I told you, because you did the right thing. There's more to it than that. She was quiet for a long time, and Ethan thought maybe she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice softer than he'd heard it before. My father was like Vincent Hale, rich, powerful, used to getting his way. When I was 16, he destroyed a man's business because the guy had the audacity to outbid him on a property deal. Ruined his reputation, bankrupted him, made sure he'd never work in the industry again. All because of ego. She stared into her mug. I watched it happen. Watched my father laugh about it at dinner. And I realized that power without accountability is just another word for cruelty. Is that why you got into strategy? Initially, no. Initially, I wanted to be like him. Thought power was the point. But after a few years helping people like him win, I couldn't stomach it anymore. So I quit, started over. And now I help people who can't fight back on their own. Do you talk to him, your father? No, haven't in 6 years. He made it clear I was either with him or against him. I chose against him. Ethan absorbed this. Does he know you're helping me? Probably not. But even if he did, I wouldn't care. She met his eyes. I spent too long doing the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. I'm not going back to that. Even if it costs you? Especially then. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. When they left, the sky was starting to lighten, the world caught in that strange in-between space before dawn. Ethan drove home, grabbed 2 hours of sleep, and got up to make Mara breakfast. She was unusually quiet during the drive to school. When they pulled up to the curb, she turned to him, her expression solemn. "Dad? Yeah? Promise me you'll come back." His throat tightened. "I promise, sweetheart. I'm just going to a hearing. I'll pick you up at 3:30 like always." "You promise?" "I promise." She hugged him tight, then grabbed her backpack and ran inside without looking back. Ethan sat in the car for a minute, steadying himself, and then drove to the courthouse. Lena was already there, dressed in a sharp gray suit, hair pulled back, every inch the professional strategist. She handed him a folder. "Last-minute notes. Review them before we go in." The courtroom was smaller than Ethan expected, wood-paneled and formal but not imposing. Judge Carolyn Reeves sat behind the bench, mid-50s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and didn't have patience for nonsense. Gerald Moss sat at the plaintiff's table with Vincent Hale beside him. Hale looked smug, confident, like he'd already won. Ethan and Lena took their seats at the defense table. The bailiff called the hearing to order. Judge Reeves looked at Moss. "Counselor, you filed a motion to introduce evidence regarding the defendant's employment history and specialized training. Make your argument." Moss stood, smooth and polished. "Your Honor, the defense wants the court to believe that Mr. Carter's actions at the cafe were those of an ordinary citizen defending himself. But Mr. Carter is far from ordinary. He possesses extensive combat training, has a documented history of working in high-risk security operations, and demonstrated a level of physical control that suggests someone who's been trained to neutralize threats with extreme prejudice. This is directly relevant to assessing whether his response was proportional or excessive." Judge Reeves turned to Lena. "Ms. Brooks?" Lena stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Moss is attempting to introduce prejudicial information that has no bearing on the facts of this case. What happened at the cafe is documented on video. Mr. Carter responded to a man who was armed, who had already committed assault, and who posed an immediate threat. How he acquired the skills to respond effectively is irrelevant. The question is whether his response was reasonable under the circumstances, and the evidence clearly shows it was. No one was injured. The threat was neutralized. Introducing Mr. Carter's employment history serves only to bias the court against him based on who he used to be, not what he actually did." Moss jumped back in. "But that's precisely the point, Your Honor. Someone with Mr. Carter's training should have known better alternatives existed. His background speaks directly to his judgment and decision-making." "And yet," Lena countered, "his judgment resulted in 0 injuries and a disarmed aggressor. If anything, his training proved he exercised restraint most people wouldn't be capable of." Judge Reeves held up a hand. "I've heard enough. I'll take this under advisement and issue a ruling by end of day. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Ethan exhaled slowly. "What does that mean?" he asked Lena as they stood. "It means we wait." They left the courthouse together. Hale and Moss were still inside, conferring in low voices. Ethan caught Hale's eye as they passed. The man's expression was cold, calculating, utterly devoid of doubt. "He thinks he's already won," Ethan muttered. "Let him think that," Lena said. "Overconfidence makes people sloppy." They grabbed lunch at a deli, neither of them particularly hungry, but needing something to do with their hands. Ethan's phone buzzed constantly, texts from Rick asking how it went, a voicemail from Ms. Brennan checking in, 3 messages from reporters he immediately deleted. At 3:15, Lena's phone rang. She answered, listened, thanked whoever was on the other end, and hung up. Reeves issued her ruling. Ethan's heart kicked against his ribs. And? She blocked it, said Moss failed to establish sufficient relevance and that introducing your employment history would be unduly prejudicial. She's excluding the evidence. Ethan sagged back against the booth. We won? We won this round. The trial's still coming, but this is huge. Without your past, Moss has to build his case on what's actually in the video, and that works in our favor. For the first time in 2 weeks, Ethan felt something close to hope. He picked up Mara right on time. She ran to the car, backpack bouncing, and climbed in. "How was the hearing?" she asked immediately. "It went okay." "Just okay?" "Better than okay. It went well." She grinned. "I knew it would." That night, after Mara fell asleep, Ethan opened a beer, the first one he'd allowed himself since this whole mess started, and sat on the back porch staring at the overgrown yard. Lena had texted earlier saying she'd see him tomorrow to start preparing for the actual trial, but for tonight he was letting himself breathe. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Yeah?" Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice, low and venomous. "You got lucky today, Carter. But luck runs out. And when it does, I'll make sure you lose everything." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone, his brief moment of peace evaporating. He saved the number, screenshot the call log, and texted Lena. "Hale just called me." Threatening. Her response came back immediately. "Don't engage. Document everything. I'll handle it." Ethan set the phone down and finished his beer in the dark, listening to crickets and distant traffic, and wondered how much worse this was going to get before it got better. The threatening call changed things. Not in obvious ways. Ethan still went to work, still picked up Mara, still maintained the routines that kept them both grounded. But underneath, everything felt sharper, more fragile, like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. Lena filed a police report the next morning. The officer who took the statement was sympathetic but unhelpful. "Unless he makes a specific threat or shows up at your house, there's not much we can do. Keep documenting everything. If it escalates, call us immediately." "So we wait for him to actually do something?" Ethan asked after they left the station. "Unfortunately, yes." Lena's jaw was tight. "But it also shows he's rattled. People who are winning don't make late-night threatening calls. They sit back and let the system work for them. He's still dangerous." "I know, which is why we're going to be careful." Careful meant new locks on all the doors, motion sensor lights in the backyard, a security camera over the front porch that Ethan installed himself on Saturday morning while Mara was at a friend's birthday party. Lena had offered to hire a professional security company, but Ethan refused. He'd spent 6 years learning how to secure locations under hostile conditions. He didn't need to pay someone else to do what he could do better himself. The trial date was set for 5 weeks out. In the meantime, the video continued to spread, mutating as it traveled across platforms. Someone had edited it with dramatic music. Someone else had turned it into a meme. A podcast devoted an entire episode to analyzing Ethan's technique frame by frame, with a self-defense instructor breaking down the mechanics of the wrist lock and explaining why it was textbook perfect. Ethan listened to 10 minutes of it before turning it off, feeling sick. "You're famous," Rick said at work, not unkindly. "Might as well get used to it." "I don't want to be famous." Little late for that. Rick wasn't wrong. Everywhere Ethan went, people recognized him. At the grocery store, a woman stopped him in the cereal aisle to tell him he was an inspiration. At the gas station, a teenager asked if he taught self-defense classes. At Mara's school pickup, another parent cornered him to ask if he'd consider speaking at a PTA meeting about community safety. He declined everything politely but firmly. The attention made his skin crawl, made him hyper-aware of exits and sightlines, made him feel like the walls of his carefully constructed quiet life were closing in. Mara started having nightmares. Not every night, but enough that Ethan started sleeping with his door open so he'd hear her if she called out. The nightmares were always variations of the same thing: the cafe, the angry man, something bad happening that she couldn't stop. She'd wake up crying, and Ethan would sit on the edge of her bed, rubbing her back until she fell asleep again, Rexy clutched tight against her chest. "Maybe she should talk to someone," Lena suggested one evening. They were in the kitchen going over witness statements, but Ethan had mentioned the nightmares in passing. "Like a therapist?" "Yeah, a child psychologist, someone who specializes in trauma." "She's not traumatized." Lena set down her pen. "Ethan." She watched her father restrain a man who had a weapon. That's traumatic by definition. "She's fine. She's having nightmares. Kids have nightmares." "Not like this." Lena's voice was gentle but insistent. "I'm not saying she's broken. I'm saying she might benefit from talking to someone who can help her process what happened." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist that Mara was resilient, that she'd bounce back on her own, that dragging her to a therapist would just make it worse by forcing her to relive it. But the truth was, he didn't know. He didn't know what 7-year-olds needed when they witnessed violence. He'd never had that kind of support himself growing up, so he had no framework for it. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Lena nodded and went back to the statements. But Ethan saw the concern in her eyes, the way she kept glancing at him like she wanted to say more but was holding back. That night, after Mara fell asleep, Ethan sat at his laptop and researched child psychologists in the area. There were 3 that took his insurance. He bookmarked their websites and closed the laptop, exhausted by the weight of making yet another decision he wasn't qualified to make. The following week, depositions began. Ethan spent hours answering questions from Gerald Moss, whose entire strategy seemed designed to make him look either incompetent or dangerous, depending on which angle served the narrative better. Moss asked about his training, his employment history, his decision-making process at the Café, his relationship with Mara's mother, his financial situation, his daily routine. Everything was fair game. Everything was meant to build a picture of someone unstable, someone who couldn't be trusted to respond proportionally to conflict. Lena sat beside Ethan through all of it, occasionally objecting when Moss veered too far into irrelevant territory, but mostly letting him talk. Afterward, she'd explained that depositions were about information gathering, not winning arguments. Let him think he's getting somewhere. We'll deal with it at trial. Sophie, the barista from the cafe, was deposed next. Ethan wasn't allowed to be present, but Lena filled him in afterward. She was great. Nervous, but solid. She confirmed that Hale was aggressive, that he made her feel unsafe, that you only intervened after he shoved you and reached for something in his jacket. Moss tried to suggest you overreacted, but she shut it down. Said if you hadn't been there, she doesn't know what would have happened. Did Hale show up? He sat in the back. Didn't say a word, but Sophie said he stared at her the entire time, trying to intimidate her. Did it work? She cried in the parking lot after, but she didn't change her story. Ethan felt a surge of guilt. Sophie was a kid working a minimum wage job, and now she was caught in the middle of this because he'd decided to play hero. Can we do anything for her? Like what? I don't know. Something. She shouldn't have to deal with this. Lena studied him. You know, most people wouldn't care, right? Most people would just be focused on their own defense. I'm not most people. I'm starting to notice that. As the trial date approached, Ethan found himself spending more time with Lena. Not just working on the case, but actually talking. She had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, a tendency to make cutting observations about human nature that were usually accurate and occasionally hilarious. She told him about growing up in a house where image was everything, where her father's business associates were more important than family dinners, where love was transactional and conditional. Ethan told her about his mother, who'd raised him alone after his father left, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep them housed and fed, who'd died of cancer when he was 17 and left him completely unmoored. Is that why you joined? Lena asked one night. They were sitting on his back porch, the security light casting long shadows across the yard. Mara was asleep upstairs. It was past midnight, but neither of them seemed inclined to end the conversation. Joined what? The work you did before. The Black Ops stuff. Ethan took a sip of water. He'd stopped drinking beer after that one night, needing to stay sharp. Partly, I was angry, lost, needed structure and purpose. They gave me that. Do you regret it? He thought about that. Thought about the things he'd done, the places he'd been, the person he'd been. I regret some of it, not all of it. I learned things that keep Mara safe now, learned how to stay calm under pressure, learned how to assess threats. But I also learned that following orders without questioning them makes you complicit in things you can't undo. What made you stop? Realizing I couldn't look my daughter in the eye and tell her to be a good person if I wasn't being one myself. Lena was quiet for a long moment. That's more self-awareness than most people ever achieve. Doesn't make the past go away. No, but it means something that you tried. They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the night sounds, and Ethan realized he was starting to rely on Lena's presence in ways that went beyond legal strategy. She'd become a constant, someone he trusted, someone who saw the worst parts of his past and didn't flinch. It was unfamiliar and slightly terrifying, but he didn't want it to stop. 2 weeks before trial, Vincent Hale made his next move. A story appeared in the local paper, front page above the fold, with the headline, Mysterious Past of Café Vigilante Raises Questions. The article was carefully worded, avoiding anything directly libelous, but the implications were clear. Unnamed sources suggested Ethan had worked in private military contracting, that he'd been involved in overseas operations that were never officially acknowledged, that his decision to walk away had been abrupt and unexplained. The article stopped short of calling him dangerous, but it planted the seed effectively. Ethan read it standing in the driveway before driving Mara to school, the newspaper trembling slightly in his hands. By the time he dropped her off, 3 parents had already texted him links to the article. By lunch, it had been picked up by regional news outlets. By evening, it was trending on Twitter. Lena showed up at his house that night without calling first. She walked in, saw his face, and said, "We're suing them for defamation." "Can we prove it's Hale?" "The reporter's notes will show his sources during discovery, and even if we can't prove it definitively, filing the suit sends a message that we're not going to roll over." "Will it work?" "It'll make him more careful. That's something." They drafted the defamation complaint that night, Lena's laptop balanced on the coffee table, both of them running on caffeine and frustration. Around 2 a.m., Ethan's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "You should have settled when you had the chance." He showed it to Lena. She screenshot it, added it to the documentation file, and kept working. "He's unraveling. People who are in control don't send texts like that." Or he's escalating. Could be both. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed listening to the house settle, his mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. What if Hale came after Mara directly? What if he manufactured evidence? What if the jury decided Ethan was dangerous regardless of the facts? The what-ifs multiplied until dawn, and then he got up, made coffee, and started the day over again. Mara noticed he was on edge. She'd started watching him more carefully, her questions more pointed. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked one morning while he was making her lunch. "Yes, sweetheart, just tired." "You're always tired now." "I'm fine." She frowned. "You say that a lot." "Because it's true." But her expression said she knew he was lying, and that hurt worse than anything Hale had done so far. That afternoon, Ethan called one of the child psychologists he'd bookmarked, made an appointment for the following week. When he told Mara, she looked worried. "Am I in trouble?" "No, not at all." "Then why do I have to see a doctor?" "She's not that kind of doctor. She's someone who helps kids talk about things that are bothering them." "Nothing's bothering me." "You've been having nightmares." Mara's face closed off. "I'm fine." There it was again. The same lie he kept telling himself reflected back at him through his daughter. "It's okay if you're not fine, Mara. It's okay to be scared or worried or upset. That's why we're going to talk to someone." She didn't respond, just nodded and went back to her homework, shoulders tense, and Ethan felt like he'd failed some crucial parenting test without knowing the questions. The days blurred together after that. More depositions, more legal filings, more media attention that Ethan tried and failed to ignore. Rick gave him 2 weeks off work without having to ask, saying the warehouse could spare him and he needed to focus on getting through the trial. Ethan was grateful, but also unmoored. Work had been one of the few constants that kept him grounded. Lena filled the gaps. She showed up every day, sometimes with legal documents, sometimes with groceries, once with a new book about dinosaurs for Mara that made the girl light up for the first time in days. They'd fallen into a rhythm that felt almost domestic, and Ethan wasn't sure when that had happened or what it meant. One evening after Mara went to bed, they sat on the couch going over jury selection strategy. Lena was explaining the importance of striking potential jurors who had ties to law enforcement or military backgrounds when she stopped mid-sentence. "What?" Ethan asked. "You're not listening." "I am." "No, you're staring at me like you're trying to figure something out." He was. He'd been wondering how someone like her, smart, driven, successful, had ended up spending every evening in his cramped rental house helping him fight a battle she had no obligation to fight. "Why are you really here?" "We've been over this." "I know what you said. I'm asking what you're not saying." Lena closed her laptop. "You want the truth?" "Yeah. I'm here because for the first time in 6 years, I feel like I'm doing something that actually matters. I spent so long helping terrible people win that I forgot what it felt like to be on the right side of something. And you remind me that there are still people worth fighting for." She paused. Also, your daughter's really funny, and I like being around her. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the sudden rush of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite name, so he just said, "Thank you." "You're welcome." They went back to work, but something had shifted. The air felt different, charged. Ethan caught himself watching her when she wasn't looking, noticing things he'd been too stressed to notice before. The way she pushed her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the small scar on her left hand from what she'd once mentioned was a childhood bike accident, the way her entire face changed when she smiled for real instead of the professional version she used with everyone else. He wondered if she noticed him noticing, wondered if it mattered. The trial was now 10 days away. Discovery had closed. Witness lists were finalized. Judge Reeves had ruled on all outstanding motions. There was nothing left to do but wait and prepare and try not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Mara's first therapy appointment was on a Wednesday afternoon. Ethan sat in the waiting room while she talked to Dr. Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that had put Mara at ease almost immediately. After 45 minutes, Dr. Chen brought Mara out and asked if Ethan could stay for a few minutes. "Is she okay?" he asked once Mara was occupied with toys in the corner of the office. "She's processing, which is healthy, but she's also carrying a lot of worry about you." "About me?" "She's scared you're going to get hurt or taken away. She doesn't understand the legal system, so in her mind, the bad man from the cafe is trying to hurt her dad, and she doesn't know how to protect you." Ethan's chest tightened. What do I do? Be honest with her about what's happening in age-appropriate terms. Let her ask questions. Reassure her that adults are handling the adult problems. And most importantly, let her see that you're okay. Kids are perceptive. If you're constantly stressed and pretending you're not, she'll internalize that stress as her responsibility. I'm trying to protect her. I know. But sometimes the best protection is honesty. That night, Ethan sat Mara down after dinner and told her the truth. A simplified version, but the truth nonetheless. That the man from the cafe was upset and had gotten lawyers involved. That there was going to be a trial where people would talk about what happened. That it might take a while, but everything would be okay. What if it's not okay? Mara asked, her voice small. Then we'll deal with it together. But I'm not going anywhere. No matter what happens, I'm your dad, and that doesn't change. She climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done in months, and buried her face against his chest. He held her, feeling the weight of her trust, and made a silent promise that he'd find a way through this without breaking that trust. Later that night, Lena showed up with takeout and found Ethan sitting on the back porch, staring at nothing. "You okay?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "Mara's therapist says I need to be more honest with her about what's happening." "That's probably good advice." "I don't know how to be honest without scaring her." "You tell her the truth, and then you show her you can handle it. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for." Ethan looked at her. "You'd be a good parent," Lena laughed, startled. "Where did that come from?" "Just an observation." "I don't know about that. I can barely keep a houseplant alive. Plants are harder than kids. Kids tell you when they need something." "Fair point." She was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, you're a good parent. Mara's lucky to have you." "Doesn't always feel that way." "It never does. That's how you know you care." They sat together until the food got cold, talking about nothing and everything. And Ethan realized that somewhere along the way, Lena had become more than just his lawyer. She'd become his friend. Maybe more than that, though he wasn't ready to examine what more might mean. 5 days before trial, Hale's legal team made one final push. They offered a settlement, $50,000, a public apology from Ethan, and an agreement not to discuss the case publicly. In exchange, all charges would be dropped. Ethan read the offer sitting at his kitchen table, Lena beside him. "What do you think?" "I think it's a trap. The public apology would be an admission of wrongdoing. They'd use it to destroy your reputation even without a conviction." "But it would end this. At what cost? You'd be admitting you were wrong when you weren't, and you don't have $50,000 anyway." "I could borrow it." "From who? And then what? You'd spend the next decade paying off debt for something you didn't do wrong while Hale walks away vindicated?" Lena shook her head. "We're so close, Ethan. We have the video. We have witnesses. We have momentum. Don't give up now." "I'm not giving up." I'm trying to protect Mara. And the best way to protect her is to win. To show her that doing the right thing matters, that truth matters, that you don't back down just because someone with money tries to bully you. Ethan looked at the settlement offer again, looked at the number, looked at the language that would effectively paint him as the aggressor. He thought about Mara asking if he'd come back from the hearing, thought about her nightmares, thought about the life he'd built from nothing, and whether he was willing to let Vincent Hale take it apart. "We go to trial," he said finally. Lena smiled. "Good." They spent the weekend doing final prep, mock cross-examinations, witness coordination, exhibit review. By Sunday night, Ethan's head was spinning with information, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a full meal. "You need to sleep," Lena said, packing up her laptop around 11. "I'll sleep after the trial." "You'll collapse before the trial if you keep this up." "I'm fine." She gave him a look that suggested she knew exactly how not fine he was, but had decided not to push it. "I'll see you tomorrow. Try to rest." After she left, Ethan checked on Mara, sound asleep, Rexy under one arm, and then stood in his own bedroom staring at the bed like it was an enemy. He knew he should sleep, knew he needed to be sharp for what was coming, but his mind wouldn't stop running scenarios, anticipating questions, preparing for disaster. He was still awake at 3 a.m. when his phone buzzed. Text from Lena. "Stop overthinking. We've got this." He texted back. "How do you know I'm awake?" "Because I am too." "Why?" "Same reason as you. Too much writing on tomorrow." He stared at the phone for a long moment, then typed, "Thank you. For everything." Her response came quickly. "Thank me after we win." Ethan finally fell asleep around 4, his phone still clutched in his hand, and when the alarm went off 2 hours later, he felt like he'd been hit by a truck. He dragged himself into the shower, let the hot water beat against his shoulders until the tank ran cold, and then got dressed in the one suit he owned, bought for a funeral years ago and rarely worn since. Mara was quiet during breakfast. She'd insisted on coming to court for the first day, even though Ethan had tried to talk her out of it. "I want to be there," she'd said, in a tone that didn't leave room for argument. Ms. Brennan had agreed to sit with her in the gallery, keeping her occupied if things got too intense. Ethan was grateful, but also terrified of what Mara might hear or see. They drove to the courthouse in silence, Mara's hand clutching his the entire way. Lena was already there, standing outside in a navy suit that made her look like she could argue a case before the Supreme Court. She smiled when she saw them. "Ready?" Ethan looked down at Mara, who nodded solemnly, and then back at Lena. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Then let's go win this." They walked into the courthouse together, and Ethan felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment pressing down on him. The cafe, the video, the threats, the depositions, the sleepless nights. But he also felt something else, something steadier. Hope. The courtroom filled quickly. Ethan sat at the defense table beside Lena, trying to ignore the whispers behind him, the phones being silenced, the shuffling of bodies settling into wooden benches. He spotted Mara in the third row with Ms. Brennan, her dinosaur backpack at her feet, her eyes wide and uncertain. He gave her a small wave. She waved back, clutching Rexy against her chest. Vincent Hale sat directly across the aisle at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Gerald Moss and another lawyer Ethan didn't recognize. Hale looked calm, almost bored, like this was just another business meeting. He caught Ethan's eye and smiled, not friendly, not warm, just a cold acknowledgement that this was personal and he intended to win. Judge Reeves entered, and everyone stood. She was exactly as Ethan remembered from the preliminary hearing, sharp-eyed, no nonsense, with the kind of presence that made you straighten your posture without thinking about it. The bailiff called the court to order, and Reeves settled into her chair, scanning the room before speaking. "We're here for Carter versus Hale. Before we begin jury selection, does either party have any motions?" Gerald Moss stood. "No, Your Honor." Lena stood. "No, Your Honor." "Good. Let's proceed." The jury selection took most of the morning. Potential jurors filed in groups of 12, answered questions from both sides, and were either accepted or dismissed. Lena had explained the strategy beforehand. Look for people who valued fairness over authority, who had experience with bullies, who wouldn't automatically side with money and power. Ethan watched her work, noting the subtle shifts in her posture depending on who she was questioning, The way she could read a person's discomfort in the set of their shoulders or the way they avoided eye contact. By lunch, they had their jury. 7 women, 5 men, ranging from early 20s to late 60s. A retired teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, a college student. People who looked tired in the way working people always look tired, but alert enough that Ethan thought they might actually listen. During the lunch recess, Ethan took Mara to a diner 2 blocks away. Ms. Brennan came with them, giving Ethan a reassuring smile as they settled into a booth. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Fine. Tired." "You look tired." She glanced at Mara, who was coloring on the paper placemat with crayons the waitress had brought. "And how are you doing, sweetie?" "Okay," Mara said without looking up. "It's kind of boring." "Court usually is," Ms. Brennan said gently. "It gets more interesting later." "When does Dad talk?" "Probably tomorrow," Ethan said. "Maybe later today if things move fast." "Are you scared?" The question caught him off guard. He'd been so focused on keeping Mara calm that he hadn't stopped to consider his own fear. But yeah, he was scared. Terrified, actually. Scared of losing. Scared of what that would mean for Mara. Scared that everything he'd built could collapse because one entitled man couldn't handle being challenged. "A little," he admitted. "But I'm ready." Mara looked up at him, her expression serious. "You're going to win, right?" "I'm going to try my best." "That's not the same thing." "No, it's not. But it's the truth." She went back to coloring, apparently satisfied with that answer, and Ethan felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. Opening statements began at 2 o'clock. Gerald Moss went first, standing before the jury with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times and won most of them. He was good. Ethan had to admit that. He didn't yell or grandstand. He just laid out a story in calm, measured tones that made it sound reasonable and inevitable. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a man who lost control. A man who, when faced with a verbal disagreement, chose violence over de-escalation. My client, Mr. Vincent Hale, went to a cafe one morning expecting nothing more than a cup of coffee. What he got instead was a public assault that left him humiliated, injured, and traumatized. The defense will try to tell you that Mr. Carter was defending himself and others. But the evidence will show that Mr. Hale never posed a real threat, that Mr. Carter's response was wildly disproportionate, and that someone with Mr. Carter's training should have known better. This isn't about who was right or wrong in an argument. It's about whether we, as a society, accept vigilante justice when someone decides the rules don't apply to them. Moss sat down. The jury looked thoughtful. Ethan's stomach churned. Lena stood. She didn't walk to the center of the courtroom like Moss had. She stayed near the jury box, close enough that she could make eye contact with each of them individually. "Mr. Moss just told you a story. A nice, neat story where his client is the victim and my client is the villain. But stories are just that, stories. What matters are facts. And the facts are simple. Vincent Hale verbally abused a young woman trying to do her job. When my client politely asked him to lower his voice because there were children present, Mr. Hale escalated. He shoved my client. He reached into his jacket for a stun gun, a weapon. At that point, my client had a choice. Let a man with a weapon continue to threaten people or stop him. He chose to stop him, and he did so in a way that resulted in 0 injuries, not a scratch, not a bruise, nothing. That's not vigilante justice. That's self-defense. That's protecting others. And if we punish people for doing the right thing when it matters, then what kind of society are we? She sat down. The jury looked less certain now, which Ethan took as a good sign. Judge Reeves called for a 15-minute recess. Ethan stood and stretched, his legs cramping from sitting too long. Lena leaned over and whispered, "You're doing great. Just stay calm." "I'm not doing anything yet." "You're not panicking. That's something." The prosecution called its first witness after the break, a man named David Chen who'd been at the cafe that morning, sitting near the window. He was in his 40s, wearing a button-down shirt and glasses, and looked nervous to be testifying. Moss stood and walked him through the basics. Yes, he'd been there. Yes, he'd seen the altercation. Yes, it had seemed violent from his perspective. "Can you describe what you saw?" Moss asked. "The guy, Mr. Carter, he grabbed Mr. Hale really fast. Like 1 second they were arguing, and the next second Mr. Hale was on the ground. It was kind of scary, honestly." Did Mr. Hale appear to be threatening anyone physically before that moment? Not really. I mean, he was upset about his coffee, but he wasn't like attacking anyone. Thank you. No further questions. Lena stood for cross-examination. Mr. Chen, you said Mr. Hale wasn't attacking anyone, but he did shove my client, correct? I guess. Yeah, I saw that. And after he shoved my client, what did Mr. Hale do? I don't know, reached for something? Did you see what he reached for? Not until after, but yeah, there was something on the floor, some kind of device. A stun gun? I guess. I don't really know what those look like. But you saw something that could have been a weapon fall to the floor after my client restrained Mr. Hale? Yeah. So when you say it seemed violent, you're describing my client stopping a man who had just committed assault and was reaching for a potential weapon. Is that accurate? David Chen hesitated. I mean, when you put it like that, I'm not putting it anyway, Mr. Chen. I'm asking you to be precise about what you actually witnessed. Okay, yeah, that's what happened. Thank you. Lena sat down. Ethan exhaled slowly. Small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The prosecution called 3 more witnesses that afternoon. All people who'd been at the cafe, all describing variations of the same scene. Moss tried to paint Ethan as aggressive, but each time Lena's cross-examination chipped away at that narrative, forcing the witnesses to acknowledge the shove, the weapon, the fact that no one was actually hurt. By the time court adjourned for the day, Ethan was exhausted. He found Mara and Ms. Brennan in the hallway outside. Mara ran to him and hugged his waist. You did good, Dad. I haven't talked yet, sweetheart. I know, but your lawyer is really good. Ethan smiled despite himself. Yeah, she is. Miss Brennan said goodbye, promising to be back tomorrow if they needed her. Ethan thanked her and drove Mara home, stopping for pizza on the way because neither of them had the energy to cook. They ate in front of the TV, watching a nature documentary about Arctic wolves, and for an hour, Ethan let himself pretend they were just a normal family having a normal evening. Lena showed up around 9 after Mara had gone to bed. She looked as tired as Ethan felt, her hair falling out of its bun, her blazer draped over one arm. How do you think it went? Ethan asked, handing her a glass of water. Better than I expected. Moss's witnesses weren't as strong as he thought they'd be. The video is still our best asset, though. Once the jury sees it in full context, they'll understand. When does that happen? Tomorrow, probably. Moss will finish his case, and then we present ours. That's when you'll testify. Ethan's stomach dropped. Tomorrow. Yeah, you ready? Do I have a choice? Not really. She set down the glass. But you're going to be fine. Just tell the truth. Stay calm. Don't let Moss bait you into getting defensive or angry. Answer his questions directly and trust that the jury will see you for who you are. And who am I? A father who protected people. That's it. That's the whole story. She made it sound simple. Ethan wished it felt that way. They went over his testimony again, Lena playing Moss and firing hostile questions at him until Ethan's answers felt natural instead of rehearsed. Around midnight, she closed her notebook. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. After she left, Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet his mind. He thought about the jury, about Mara sitting in the gallery, about Vincent Hale's cold smile. He thought about the cafe and that split-second decision that had set all of this in motion. He wondered if he'd do it differently if he could go back. Wondered if staying silent and letting Hale bully Sophie would have been easier in the long run. But then he thought about Sophie's scared face, about Mara watching, about the principle of the thing, and he knew he wouldn't change it, couldn't change it. Some things mattered more than easy. He finally fell asleep around 2 a.m. and woke to his alarm 4 hours later feeling like he'd been run over. He made coffee, got Mara ready for school. She was staying home today. He'd decided it was too much for her to sit through his testimony, and drove her to Rick's house. Rick's wife, Maria, had offered to watch her, and Mara liked their dog, so she went without complaint. Good luck, Dad, Mara said as she got out of the car. Thanks, kiddo. I'll pick you up after. Promise? Promise. He drove to the courthouse alone, the morning traffic lighter than usual, his mind running through everything Lena had drilled into him. Stay calm. Tell the truth. Don't get defensive. Trust the jury. Lena met him in the hallway outside the courtroom. You look terrible. Thanks. Seriously, did you sleep? Some? How much is some? 4 hours. She sighed. That'll have to do. Come on. Moss is calling his last witness, and then we're up. Moss's final witness was a forensic psychologist named Dr. Raymond Foster, who'd reviewed the video and testified that Ethan's response showed characteristic signs of someone with advanced combat training executing a pre-planned defensive maneuver. It was supposed to make Ethan sound calculated and dangerous, but Lena's cross-examination dismantled it quickly. Dr. Foster, you've never met my client, correct? Correct. And you're basing your entire assessment on 10 seconds of video? And my professional expertise, which includes training in combat tactics? Well, no. I'm a psychologist. So you have no actual expertise in determining whether a defensive maneuver is pre-planned or instinctive? I can make an informed assessment based on watching a video, once, without speaking to the person involved or understanding the context. The context is evident in the footage. Is it? Can you tell from the video that my client's daughter was present, that the man he restrained had just committed assault, that there was a weapon involved? Dr. Foster hesitated. Some of that information was provided in discovery, but not in the video itself, which means your assessment isn't based on what you saw. It's based on assumptions you made after the fact. I disagree with that characterization. I'm sure you do. No further questions. The judge called a lunch recess. Ethan couldn't eat. He tried, but his stomach was in knots, and the sandwich Lena had bought him tasted like cardboard. They sat in a conference room reviewing his testimony one last time. Remember, Lena said, Moss is going to try to make you look dangerous. He's going to ask about your training, your past, your decision-making. Don't give him anything. Answer his questions, but don't volunteer information. What if he asks something I don't want to answer? Then I'll object. But you need to stay composed. If you lose your temper, we lose the jury. I'm not going to lose my temper. Good, because this is it. This is where we win or lose. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Reeves looked at Lena. Is the defense ready to present its case? Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Ethan Carter to the stand. Ethan stood, his legs unsteady, and walked to the witness box. The bailiff swore him in. He sat down, gripping the armrest to keep his hands from shaking, and looked at Lena. She smiled, small, reassuring, and began. Mr. Carter, can you tell the jury what you do for a living? I work at a warehouse, freight handling mostly. And how long have you been doing that? About 6 years. You're also a father, correct? Yes, I have a daughter, Mara. She's 7. And you're raising her alone? Yes. Can you tell the jury what happened on the morning of the incident at the cafe? Ethan took a breath. Mara and I go there most Tuesday mornings. It's part of our routine. That day was like any other until Mr. Hale came in. He was angry about his coffee, yelling at the barista. I asked him to lower his voice because there were kids in the room, including my daughter. He didn't take that well. What did he do? He shoved me. Then he reached into his jacket, and I saw him going for something. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I knew it wasn't good. So I stopped him. How did you stop him? I restrained his arm and controlled his movement until the threat was neutralized. Did you intend to hurt him? No. I intended to stop him from hurting anyone else. And after you restrained him, what did you do? I checked on my daughter, made sure she was okay. Lena nodded. Thank you. No further questions. Gerald Moss stood and approached the witness box like a predator circling prey. Mr. Carter, you said you restrained Mr. Hale's arm. That's an interesting way to describe putting a man on the ground, isn't it? I didn't put him on the ground. Physics did. I controlled his arm, and his body followed. Semantics. The point is you used force. Minimal force. He wasn't injured. But you could have injured him, couldn't you? Someone with your training could easily have broken his wrist or dislocated his shoulder. I didn't, but you could have. I could have done a lot of things. I chose the option that stopped the threat without causing harm. Moss smiled thinly. You keep saying threat, but Mr. Hale never actually attacked anyone, did he? He shoved me. That's assault. A shove. Hardly life-threatening. A shove from a man who was reaching for a weapon. You didn't know it was a weapon at the time. I knew he was reaching for something while acting aggressively. I made a judgment call based on the information available. A judgment call that resulted in my client being humiliated in front of a room full of people. A judgment call that resulted in no one getting hurt. Moss paused, changing tactics. Mr. Carter, you have training in combat techniques, don't you? Lena stood. Objection. Relevance. Your Honor, Moss said smoothly, the witness's background is relevant to understanding whether his response was reasonable. Judge Reeves looked at Ethan. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Carter. Ethan's jaw tightened. Yes, I have training. What kind of training? General self-defense, hand-to-hand combat. Where did you receive this training? Various places over the years. Can you be more specific? Not really. It was a long time ago. Moss smiled like he'd been expecting that. Convenient. So you have extensive combat training from sources you can't or won't specify. And you want this jury to believe you used minimal force? I want this jury to believe what the video shows. No one was hurt. That's not opinion. That's fact. But someone with less training might not have been able to stop themselves. Someone with your skills could easily have. Someone with less training might have panicked and let a man with a weapon do whatever he wanted. I stopped him safely. That was the goal. Moss stared at him for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if pushing harder would help or hurt. Finally, he said, "No further questions." Ethan returned to the defense table, his hands still shaking slightly. Lena squeezed his arm. "You did great," she whispered. The defense called Sophie next. She looked terrified walking to the stand, her hands clasped in front of her, but once she started talking, her voice was steady. "He was screaming at me," Sophie said when Lena asked her to describe Hale's behavior. "Not just angry, screaming, telling me I was incompetent, that I didn't know how to do my job. I've had angry customers before, but this was different. He was standing over me, invading my space, and I felt trapped." "Did you feel threatened?" "Yes. Absolutely." "What happened when Mr. Carter intervened?" "He asked Mr. Hale to lower his voice. Mr. Hale got even angrier. He shoved Mr. Carter, and then he reached for something in his jacket. I thought," her voice broke, "I thought he was going to hurt someone." "What did Mr. Carter do?" "He stopped him, really fast, and then it was over, and Mr. Hale was on the ground, and I was just relieved." "Thank you, Sophie." Moss's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. He tried to suggest Sophie was exaggerating Hale's aggression, but she held firm, her answers clear and consistent. By the time she stepped down, Ethan could see the jury's sympathy had shifted. The defense's final witness was an expert in self-defense law, a retired police sergeant named Marcus Webb, who walked the jury through the legal standards for justified force. He explained reasonable perception of threat, proportional response, and the duty to retreat, or in this case, the lack thereof when someone else was in danger. Based on the evidence, Webb testified, Mr. Carter's response was textbook appropriate. He perceived a credible threat, acted to neutralize it using the minimum force necessary, and stopped immediately once the threat was contained. That's exactly what we train law enforcement to do. Moss tried to poke holes in Webb's testimony, but it was solid. Webb had 40 years of experience and had reviewed hundreds of use-of-force cases. He knew his material, and he presented it calmly and authoritatively. By the time closing arguments rolled around the next morning, Ethan felt like he'd been awake for a week straight. Moss gave another polished speech about accountability and proportionality, but it rang hollow after the testimony. Lena's closing was simpler and more direct. "This case isn't complicated," she told the jury. "A man threatened people. My client stopped him. No one was hurt. If we punish that, if we say that Ethan Carter should have just stood by and hoped for the best, then we're telling every decent person in this country that doing the right thing isn't worth the risk. I don't believe that, and I don't think you do either." Judge Reeves gave the jury their instructions and sent them out to deliberate. Ethan sat in the courtroom with Lena, waiting, the minutes stretching into hours. Mara texted him around noon asking how it was going. He texted back that they were waiting for the jury and he'd call her soon. 3 hours passed, then 4. Ethan's nerves were frayed to nothing by the time the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone filed back into the courtroom. The jury looked tired but composed. Judge Reeves took the verdict form from the foreperson and read it silently before handing it back. "Will the defendant please rise?" Ethan stood, Lena beside him, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. The foreperson, a woman in her 50s with graying hair, stood and read from the paper in her hands. In the matter of Hale versus Carter, we find in favor of the defendant, Ethan Carter, on all counts. The words took a second to land, and then Lena was grabbing his arm, and people in the gallery were murmuring, and Judge Reeves was thanking the jury and dismissing them, and Ethan realized they'd won. They'd actually won. Hale stood abruptly and stormed out of the courtroom without a word, Moss hurrying after him. Ethan just stood there, numb, trying to process what had just happened. "We won," Lena said, her voice shaking slightly. "Ethan, we won." "I know. You can breathe now." He did. A long, shaky breath that felt like the first real one he'd taken in weeks. And then, without thinking, he pulled Lena into a hug. She froze for half a second before hugging him back, and they stood there in the middle of the courtroom, both of them too overwhelmed to speak. When they finally pulled apart, Lena was smiling, really smiling, the kind that reached her eyes. "Come on, let's get out of here." They walked out of the courthouse together into bright afternoon sunlight. Ethan called Mara from the steps. "We won, sweetheart." Her shriek of joy was loud enough that he had to pull the phone away from his ear. "Really? You really won? Really? Can we get ice cream?" "Yeah, we can get ice cream." "With sprinkles?" "With whatever you want." He hung up and looked at Lena, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said. "For everything." "You already thanked me." "I know, but I mean it." She stepped closer, and for a second Ethan thought she might hug him again. Instead, she just said, "You fought for what mattered. That's all I did. Made sure people saw it." They stood there on the courthouse steps, the world moving around them, and Ethan realized that something had fundamentally shifted. Not just the verdict, though, that mattered, but something between him and Lena, something that had been building for weeks and had finally crystallized into something real. He didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know if it was the right time or if he was reading too much into exhaustion and relief. So he just said, "I should go pick up Mara." "Yeah, you should." "Do you want to come for the ice cream?" Lena smiled. "I'd like that." They drove separately to Rick's house, picked up Mara, who immediately launched herself at Ethan and refused to let go, and went to the ice cream place on Main Street. Mara got a triple scoop with sprinkles and gummy bears. Ethan got vanilla, Lena got chocolate. They sat outside at a wobbly metal table, and Mara chattered nonstop about everything and nothing, her relief palpable. And Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It wouldn't last forever, life never did. But for right now, sitting in the sun with his daughter and the woman who'd saved them both, it was enough. The days after the verdict felt strange. Not bad strange, just unfamiliar, like wearing shoes that fit but you'd never broken in. Ethan kept expecting something else to happen, some other crisis to emerge from the shadows, but nothing did. Vincent Hale disappeared from his life as abruptly as he'd entered it. No more calls, no more lawyers, just silence, which was somehow more unnerving than the threats had been. Lena stayed, not in an intrusive way, not like she was waiting for something to happen between them, but she kept showing up, for coffee, for dinner, to help Mara with a science project about volcanoes that required more adult supervision than Ethan had anticipated. She'd become part of their routine without either of them discussing it, and Ethan found he didn't mind. More than that, he liked it, liked having another adult to talk to, liked the way Mara lit up when Lena walked through the door, liked feeling less alone in the constant work of keeping everything together. But 3 weeks after the trial, Lena showed up at his door looking different. Not bad different, just serious in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Can we talk?" she asked. Mara was at a sleepover, her first since the Café incident, something Ethan had finally agreed to after Dr. Chen had suggested that returning to normal activities would help. So the house was empty and quiet, which somehow made Lena's request feel heavier. "Yeah, come in." They sat in the living room, Lena on the couch, Ethan in the chair across from her. She was holding a folder, and she set it on the coffee table between them like it weighed more than paper should. "I got a job offer," she said. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Where?" "New York, corporate strategy firm, big clients, bigger cases, the kind of work I used to do before I left." She paused. "The kind I swore I'd never go back to." "Are you taking it?" I don't know. That's why I'm here. She looked at him directly. No deflection, no professional mask. I need to figure out what I actually want. And I think you're part of that equation. Ethan didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to tell her to stay, to admit that the past few weeks had been the closest he'd felt to normal in years. That the idea of her leaving made him realize how much he'd come to depend on her presence. But another part, the part that had spent 6 years building walls to keep people out, wondered if that was fair. If asking her to stay was just another way of being selfish. What do you want me to say? He asked finally. I want you to tell me the truth. About how you feel, about this. She gestured between them. Because I've been pretending this is just about friendship, just about helping you through a hard time, but it's not. Not for me. And I don't think it is for you either. She was right. He knew she was right. But admitting it meant acknowledging that he'd let someone get close enough to matter, close enough to hurt him if she left. And that scared him more than anything Hale had thrown at him. I don't know how to do this, Ethan said quietly. The last relationship I had ended with her walking out and never looking back. I don't know how to trust that someone will stay. I'm not her. I know, but that doesn't make it easier. Lena leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking if you want me to stay. If this, us, whatever we're building, matters enough that we should try. What about the job? I'll turn it down if I have a reason to, but I need to know I'm not imagining this. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to organize the chaos in his head into something coherent. The truth was he did want her to stay, wanted it more than he'd wanted anything in a long time. But wanting something and knowing how to handle it were different things entirely. I care about you, he said, opening his eyes and meeting hers. More than I thought I would. More than I was prepared for. And that terrifies me because I don't know how to protect Mara from getting hurt if this doesn't work out. You can't protect her from everything, Ethan. That's not how life works. I can try, and you'll fail. Not because you're not a good father, but because failure is built into the design. People leave. Things fall apart. That's the risk of caring about anyone. She paused. But the alternative is staying closed off forever, and I don't think that's what you want. I don't think it's what Mara needs either. What does Mara need? To see you happy. To see that it's okay to let people in. To learn that taking risks on people is worth it, even when it's scary. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist that keeping his distance was safer for everyone involved. But he thought about Mara's nightmares, about the way she'd started asking why Lena didn't come over anymore when a day went by without her visiting. Thought about how much lighter the house felt when Lena was in it. I want you to stay, he said finally. I don't know what that looks like yet, and I'm probably going to be terrible at this, but yeah, I want you to stay. Lena smiled, and it was the real one, the one that made her whole face change. Okay. I'll turn down the job, stay here, figure out what comes next. Just like that? Just like that? She stood up, walked over to his chair, and kissed him. It was quick, almost tentative, like she was testing to see if he'd pull away. He didn't. Instead, he kissed her back. And for a moment, the weight he'd been carrying for weeks lifted just enough that he could breathe. When they pulled apart, Lena was smiling again. So, now what? Now I have no idea. I've never done this before. Not like this. Me neither. So I guess we figure it out as we go. That sounded both terrifying and exactly right. The next few weeks were an exercise in negotiating new territory. Lena didn't move in. Neither of them was ready for that. But she started spending more time at the house. She and Mara developed their own relationship, separate from Ethan, built on shared interests in books and terrible puns that made Ethan groan. Watching them together, seeing Mara open up in ways she hadn't since the cafe, made something in Ethan's chest settle. But not everything was smooth. There were moments when Ethan pulled back without meaning to, when the instinct to protect himself kicked in and he shut down mid-conversation. Lena called him on it every time, refusing to let him retreat into silence. It was frustrating and uncomfortable and probably necessary. You do this thing, she said one night after Mara had gone to bed. They were cleaning up dinner, and Ethan had gone quiet after she'd asked about his plans for the weekend. You disappear inside your own head when things feel too close. I don't mean to. I know, but it makes it hard to know where I stand. You stand, he stopped, trying to find the right words. You stand in a place I didn't think I'd let anyone stand again. And sometimes that freaks me out. Okay. But when it does, tell me. Don't just shut down and make me guess. I'm not good at talking about feelings. No kidding, but you're going to have to get better at it if this is going to work. She was right. He knew she was right. So he started trying, awkwardly, haltingly, but trying. It didn't come naturally. Most of the time it felt like pulling teeth. But slowly, he got better at naming what he was feeling instead of just swallowing it and hoping it would go away. Meanwhile, life continued. Ethan went back to work full-time. Rick gave him a raise, small, but enough to matter, and stopped asking if he was okay every 5 minutes. The media attention faded as new stories took over the news cycle. The video was still out there, still racking up views, but people stopped recognizing Ethan on the street. Slowly, he faded back into the obscurity he'd always preferred. Mara's nightmares stopped. Not all at once, but gradually, until she was sleeping through the night more often than not. Dr. Chen said she was processing, building resilience, learning that scary things could happen and she could survive them. Ethan wasn't sure if that was comforting or depressing, but he supposed it was true either way. 2 months after the trial, Ethan got a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, still trained to be wary, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Carter?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "Yeah. My name is Rachel Corey. I'm a producer for a podcast that covers legal cases and social justice issues. I was hoping to interview you about what happened at the cafe." Ethan's first instinct was to say no and hang up, but he paused. "What kind of interview?" "Just a conversation about your experience. What it was like going through the legal system. How the attention affected you and your family. We're interested in the human side of the story, not the spectacle." "I don't really want to be part of the spectacle." "I understand, but your story matters. Not because of the video or the trial, but because it raises questions about how we treat people who intervene in dangerous situations, whether we support them or punish them. I think your perspective could help other people facing similar situations." Ethan thought about Sophie, about the way she'd cried in the parking lot after her deposition, thought about the messages he'd received from people saying they were inspired to stand up to bullies because of what he'd done. Thought about whether his silence was protecting his privacy or just avoiding responsibility for the conversation his actions had started. "Let me think about it," he said. "Of course, I'll send you some information about the podcast and you can reach out if you decide you're interested." She hung up. Ethan stared at his phone for a long minute, then called Lena. "Should I do it?" he asked after explaining the call. "Do you want to?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should just move on, but another part thinks maybe it matters. Maybe talking about it could actually help someone." "Then do it. But only if it's for you, not because you feel obligated." "Is there a difference?" "Yeah, obligation feels like a burden. Choice feels like power." He thought about that. Thought about the fact that everything since the cafe had felt like things happening to him. The lawsuit, the media attention, the scrutiny. Maybe doing the interview would be a way of reclaiming the narrative, of choosing how his story was told instead of letting other people define it for him. "I'll do it," he decided. The interview happened 2 weeks later over video call. Rachel Corey was in her 30s, sharp but not aggressive, and she asked good questions. Not gotcha questions, just honest ones about what he'd been thinking in that moment, how it had affected his relationship with Mara, what he'd learned about himself through the process. "Do you regret it?" she asked near the end. "Stepping in that day?" Ethan thought about that. Thought about the weeks of hell that had followed, the fear, the exhaustion, the way his life had been turned inside out. But he also thought about Sophie safe behind the counter, about Mara learning that her father would protect people when it mattered, about the fact that he'd faced down Vincent Hale and his army of lawyers and won. "No," he said, "I don't regret it. I wish it had been easier, but I don't regret doing the right thing." "Even though it cost you so much?" "It didn't cost me everything. And what I gained, knowing I can look my daughter in the eye and tell her to stand up for what's right without being a hypocrite, that matters more." When the episode aired 3 weeks later, Ethan listened to it once and then didn't think about it again. He'd said what he needed to say. Whether people agreed or disagreed wasn't his problem anymore. But the response surprised him. Messages started coming in. Not the angry, chaotic ones from before, but thoughtful ones from people who'd been in similar situations. A teacher who'd intervened in a fight and faced administrative punishment. A woman who'd stopped an assault and been sued by the attacker. A teenager who'd stood up to a bully and been suspended. They weren't looking for advice, just sharing their stories, saying they felt less alone knowing someone else had been through it. Ethan read all of them. And then, because Lena had taught him that acknowledging things mattered, he responded to every single one. 3 months after the trial, Vincent Hale's name appeared in the news again. But this time, it wasn't about Ethan. An investigation into Hale Properties had uncovered evidence of fraud, falsified inspections, bribed officials, contracts awarded through intimidation. The kind of behavior that had probably been going on for years but had only come to light because someone finally looked closely enough. Ethan didn't feel vindicated exactly, more like confirmed. The man who'd tried to destroy him for bruising his ego was exactly the kind of person who cut corners and hurt people for profit. The trial had never really been about the cafe. It had been about Hale refusing to accept that someone had said no to him. "Do you think we had anything to do with this?" Ethan asked Lena when the story broke. They were sitting on his back porch, watching Mara play in the yard with a soccer ball. The investigation? Maybe indirectly. Once you beat him in court, other people probably felt brave enough to come forward. That's how these things usually work. One person stands up and suddenly everyone else realizes they can too. That's a lot of responsibility. You didn't ask for it, but you handled it. That counts for something. Hale was arrested 2 weeks later. The charges were extensive enough that he was looking at serious prison time. Ethan felt nothing watching the news coverage. Not satisfaction, not anger, just a vague sense that the universe had a way of catching up with people eventually. What he did feel was relief. Relief that it was over, that Mara could grow up without that shadow hanging over them, that he could finally stop looking over his shoulder. As spring turned into summer, life settled into something resembling normal. Ethan and Lena's relationship deepened in the quiet way relationships do when they're built on something real, rather than just attraction or convenience. They fought sometimes, about small things, about big things, about the fact that Ethan still struggled to communicate when he was upset. But they also figured out how to apologize, how to compromise, how to show up for each other even when it was hard. Mara thrived. Her nightmares were gone completely. She'd started a new hobby, martial arts, which Ethan had been hesitant about until Lena pointed out that maybe learning to defend herself would make her feel safer. Turned out she was right. Mara loved it. Loved the structure, the discipline, the feeling of being capable. "She's like you," Lena observed one evening after dropping Mara off at class. "How so?" "She likes knowing she can handle herself, that she doesn't have to rely on anyone else to keep her safe." "Is that a good thing?" "It's not good or bad. It just is. But it means she's going to be okay. Whatever happens, she's going to be okay." Ethan hoped she was right. 6 months after the trial, on a Saturday morning that felt like every other Saturday morning, Ethan took Mara to the cafe on Birch Street. They hadn't been back since the incident, but Mara had asked if they could go, said she missed the blueberry muffins and wanted to see Sophie. Ethan had hesitated, but Lena had encouraged him. "You can't avoid it forever, and going back might help you both close that chapter." So they went. Walked through the door together, Mara's hand in his. Sophie was behind the counter and her face lit up when she saw them. "Oh my gosh, hi! I was wondering if you'd ever come back." "We weren't sure if we should," Ethan admitted. "Are you kidding? You're welcome here any time. Actually," she reached under the counter and pulled out a blueberry muffin. "On the house. I've been hoping you'd come back so I could say thank you properly." "You already thanked me." "I know, but I mean it. What you did, standing up for me when you didn't have to, that meant something. I quit this job 2 months ago and went back to school full-time because I realized I didn't have to put up with people treating me like garbage. So thank you." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the idea that his split-second decision had rippled out into someone else's life in ways he'd never anticipated. So he just said, "You're welcome, and good luck with school." They sat at the same table by the window. Mara ate her muffin, getting sugar crystals all over her face like always, and chattered about her upcoming birthday party. Ethan sipped his coffee and watched the morning crowd filter in, people getting their caffeine fix before work, students with laptops, an elderly couple sharing a scone. Normal people living normal lives. And he realized he was one of them now. Not the guy from the video, not the defendant from the trial. Just a father having breakfast with his daughter on a Saturday morning. Lena showed up 20 minutes later, sliding into the seat beside him with her own coffee. "How does it feel?" she asked quietly. "Being back here?" "Yeah." Ethan looked around the cafe, looked at Mara, who was showing Lena a drawing she'd done in school, looked at Sophie behind the counter, laughing at something a customer said, looked at the spot where everything had changed and realized it didn't have power over him anymore. "It feels okay," he said. "It feels like we survived." "More than survived," Lena corrected. "You built something better." He supposed that was true. He had Lena now, a relationship he hadn't been looking for, but needed more than he'd realized. He had Mara, happy and healthy, and learning to be brave. He had a life that felt like his instead of something he was just trying to protect from falling apart. It wasn't perfect. He still had bad days. Still woke up sometimes with his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Still struggled to trust that good things could last. But he was trying, and that had to count for something. 2 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, Ethan asked Lena to move in. Not because he thought it would fix anything, or because he felt pressure to take the next step, but because he was tired of her leaving at the end of the night. Tired of the house feeling empty when she wasn't there. Tired of pretending he didn't want her to stay. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm not sure about anything, but I want you here. That's as sure as I get." She moved in a month later, bringing boxes of books and kitchen supplies and a ridiculous number of shoes. Mara helped her unpack, chattering excitedly about how they could share closet space and maybe redecorate the guest room into a reading nook. Watching them together, Ethan felt something he'd spent years avoiding. Hope. Real hope, not the tentative kind that was always waiting for disaster. The kind that believed things could actually be okay. They weren't perfect. They argued about whose turn it was to do dishes, about Lena's tendency to leave her work laptop open on the kitchen table, about Ethan's habit of shutting down when he was stressed. But they figured it out. They showed up for each other. They chose each other over and over in the small daily ways that mattered more than grand gestures ever could. A year after the cafe incident, Ethan took Mara and Lena back to the same table by the window. It had become their spot now, reclaimed from memory and turned into something new. Sophie had graduated and moved on, replaced by a new kid with dyed blue hair and a nose ring who made excellent lattes. The cafe had new ownership and a remodeled interior, but the blueberry muffins were still good. "Dad?" Mara asked, licking sugar off her fingers. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wasn't used to thinking about happiness as something he was allowed to claim. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I am." "Good, you seem happy, less worried all the time." "Do I?" "Yeah, you smile more, and you laugh at Lena's jokes even when they're not funny." "Hey," Lena protested, but she was grinning. Mara giggled. "It's true, though. You guys are cute together. Kind of gross sometimes, but mostly cute." Ethan looked at Lena, who was watching him with an expression that made his chest feel too full. He reached across the table and took her hand, and she squeezed back. "We are pretty cute," Lena agreed. "Definitely gross, though," Mara added seriously. "Like when you kiss in the kitchen. That's super gross." "Noted," Ethan said, trying not to laugh. "We'll keep the kitchen kissing to a minimum." "Thank you." They finished their breakfast in comfortable chaos. Mara telling stories about school, Lena teasing Ethan about the coffee stain on his shirt, all of them laughing at nothing in particular. And when they finally left, walking out into bright morning sunlight, Ethan realized something that had taken him a year to fully understand. He'd spent so much of his life trying to stay invisible, trying to keep his head down and avoid attention, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to actually live. To take risks, to let people in, to believe that he deserved good things instead of just the absence of bad ones. Vincent Hale had tried to destroy him for doing the right thing, but in trying to tear him down, Hale had accidentally forced Ethan to build something stronger. A life that wasn't just about survival. A family that wasn't just him and Mara against the world. A future that felt like something worth fighting for instead of just something to endure. Standing on the sidewalk outside the cafe, Mara's hand in his and Lena by his side, Ethan finally understood what Dr. Chen had meant about resilience. It wasn't about not breaking. It was about learning that you could break and still put yourself back together, that you could survive the worst thing you thought would destroy you and come out the other side different but whole. He'd survived. More than that, he'd learned to live again. And that, Ethan realized, was the real victory. Not the trial verdict, not beating Hale, not even the relationship with Lena, though that mattered more than he knew how to express. The real victory was standing here in the sunlight with people he loved, feeling like he belonged to the world instead of just hiding from it. "What are you thinking about?" Lena asked as they walked toward the car. "Nothing important, just that I'm glad we came back here." "Me too." Mara skipped ahead, humming something off-key, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She looked back at them and waved, and Ethan waved back. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to build. They drove home through streets Ethan had driven 1,000 times before, past houses and stores and people going about their ordinary lives. The world kept turning. Problems would come. They always did. But now he knew he could face them. Not alone. Not the way he'd always tried to before, but with people beside him who chose to stay even when things got hard. That night, after Mara went to bed, Ethan and Lena sat on the back porch like they did most nights, listening to crickets and distant traffic. Lena's head was on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with words. "Thank you," Ethan said eventually. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when I was giving up on myself." Lena lifted her head to look at him. "You never gave up. You just needed someone to remind you that you didn't have to do everything alone." "Is that what you did?" "That's what we did. You let me in. That took more courage than anything else." She was right. Letting someone in, trusting them to stay, believing he was worth the effort, that had been harder than any fight, any trial, any threat Vincent Hale had thrown at him. But he'd done it, and it had been worth it. They sat together until the stars came out, until the night air turned cool and Lena shivered against him. Then they went inside, locked the door behind them, and climbed the stairs to a bedroom that belonged to both of them now, to a life they were building together, one ordinary day at a time. And in the morning, Ethan would wake up next to someone who loved him. He'd make breakfast for his daughter. He'd go to work at a job that didn't define him but paid the bills. He'd come home to a house that felt less like a hiding place and more like a home. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no perfect ending, no guarantee that everything would always be okay. But it was real. It was his. And for the first time in his life, that felt like more than enough. Ethan had learned something in the chaos of the past year, something he wished he'd understood sooner. That doing the right thing was never about the outcome. It was about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. It was about showing your daughter through actions, not just words, what it meant to have a spine when the world wanted you to fold. He'd faced down a bully. He'd survived a legal system designed to favor the powerful. He'd let someone love him even when he didn't think he deserved it. And through it all, he'd kept being a father first, because that was the one thing that had always mattered more than his own fear. Some people would say he'd gotten lucky, that the video had saved him, that the jury had ruled the right way by chance, that everything had worked out because the universe owed him one. But Ethan knew better. Luck was standing in the right place when opportunity showed up. Courage was standing there on purpose, even when every instinct screamed at you to run. He'd chosen to stand, and that choice had changed everything. Years from now, when Mara was grown and facing her own impossible choices, he hoped she'd remember this. Not the video or the trial or the attention, just the fact that her father had stood up when it mattered, had fought for what was right even when it cost him everything, and had built something beautiful from the wreckage. That was the legacy he wanted to leave her. Not perfection, not fearlessness, just the knowledge that you could be terrified and do the right thing anyway, that you could break and heal, that you could let people in without losing yourself, that you could survive, and more than survive, you could live. And as Ethan lay in bed that night, Lena breathing softly beside him, he realized he'd finally found what he'd been looking for all along. Not safety, though they were safer now than they'd been in months. Not certainty, because life never offered that. He'd found peace, the kind that came from knowing you'd done everything you could, from accepting that some things were outside your control, from trusting that the people you loved would catch you when you fell. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined when he walked into that cafe a year ago. It was better, because it wasn't really an ending at all. It was just the beginning of what came next.